President Trump accepting an invitation from the Chinese president to visit Beijing in April as President Xi pushes to get more involved in the Ukraine-Russia peace talks. President Trump says, quote, "We discussed many topics, including Ukraine, Russia, fentanyl, soybeans, and other products." Our next guest is the top-ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. She joins us now, Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Senator, your thoughts about, good morning to you. Your thoughts about China playing a role. No one has more influence over Russia than China. Can they be constructive?
Well, they haven't been to date, because so far what they've done is fuel Russia's war machine in a way that has allowed this war to continue and the casualties to mount and the destruction to mount. So I think what China is doing is looking very closely at whether Russia is going to be successful in the outcome of these peace negotiations, because as China is looking at their expansionist ambitions across the Indo-Pacific, if they think the United States is not willing to stand by our ally Ukraine and support them against Russia, then they're going to assume we're not going to stand by our allies in the Indo-Pacific either. So there's a lot on the line in terms of these peace negotiations, not just in terms of Ukraine, but in terms of China and what China is going to look at doing in the future.
Because you're worried about Taiwan, as the rest of the world is, especially they're an ally and
Absolutely.
They have most of the chip production. I'm always feeling good when Secretary of State Rubio is taking the lead. I sense he took those 28, he knocked it down to 19, and both sides are optimistic something could get done. The real question to you is, in your gut, do you think Russia is vulnerable enough to play ball and UAE today with these 19 points, or you think you're just going to be maximalist?
Well, I agree. I think Secretary Rubio has been critical in improving the negotiations. And what we know about Russia is that Russia only responds to pressure. And if Russia thinks the United States is not going to do anything, then they're going to continue to take a view that they want to get everything that's on the table for them in any negotiations. That is not in Ukraine's interest, it's not in America's interest, and it's not in Europe's interest. One of the things that we know that Russia is doing, first of all, it can't be trusted. We've seen what they did to overturn the Budapest Agreement when they promised they weren't going to go, they were going to protect Ukraine when it gave up its nuclear weapons. We know that in the Minsk Agreement, after the invasion of Crimea, they then turned around and invaded Ukraine again. We know that they invaded Georgia. So they are not going to stop unless they are forced to stop. And what we've heard from experts in the Foreign Relations Committee and what President Zelensky has said as well is that Russia has armed in a way that is not just going after Ukraine, but they have designs on NATO countries, on the Baltics. And so we need to make sure that we have real security guarantees to protect Ukraine, and that Russia knows we are going to put every form of pressure on them that we can if they don't abide by any agreement. We're
going to have to pour billions into that region if we let Ukraine go, or if they look at the short end of the stick, they'll get the wrong message. So we have a lot to talk about in your knowledge of that area. You have a lot of bipartisan support with you. You're not talking, there's a lot of people, especially in your committee, who believes exactly what you just said. Meanwhile, let's talk about health care. We know that was one of the reasons why Democrats said they were holding out, because they wanted those subsidies to continue. You, thankfully, are one of the people that said the shutdown's too painful. The president said, I'll come to the table with an idea when it comes to these subsidies. Here's what Speaker Johnson said to Fox News Digital. We have an affordability agenda, as the president has been touting, and we have to do that in earnest. Health care is part of that, but it's just the cost across the board. Now, would you be open to what the president told us on Friday, of getting the same subsidies perhaps, but giving it right to the people instead of to the insurance companies?
Well, I appreciate the fact that the president has said he's willing to come to the table. I think Democrats are ready to join in any negotiations. And I think our Republican colleagues have indicated that they think we can come up with a compromise. But it's in everyone's interest to get this done, because we know that 76% of people who receive those premium tax credits are in states that Donald Trump won when he won the election last year. 57% of them are in Republican congressional districts. So there's a real incentive to get this done. And if Republicans don't come to the table, the American people are going to make them pay at the polls next year.
Exactly. And I think they want to do it. I think they want to get something done. I just think the deductibles are so high and there's people that can afford it, that they're being subsidized. And I think you guys can get together on that. I think Senator Cassidy and you together can really get something done. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today. And just for the record, you made it clear you do not charge people for your Thanksgiving dinner. You did that in the break.
We all bring a dish. It's a family affair.
All right, Senator, thanks so much.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.